What is your money story? Your relationship with money started so much earlier than before you started earning.
You can have money and money is fine, but then going on to, but what's the point of it?
If you can't manage your emotions, don't expect to manage your money.
Money is hard to make. Where do you see that play out where people believe that it's difficult, it's hard?
Regardless of where you might sit on the spectrum, whether it's sort of a more negative associated view of money, whether it's a more money will solve all my problems, I think what we're looking at here is how you can create a more sustaining relationship with money tied to a higher purpose or vision, not just the short-sighted seek or avoid, which ultimately is just a projection of our past experiences. Greg, why do you keep making the same money mistakes?
Why do I? I'm hoping to find out on this episode.
Mate, it sounds, I was partly joking, it sounds like a personal call out, but obviously that's the theme of the episode today. Why do the listeners perhaps, keep making the same money mistakes? And obviously we want to look at, what are the beliefs, perhaps unconscious, perhaps we just see the end product of the beliefs that are affecting our relationship with money, our goals, our health, our wealth. So what comes first to mind for you? I mean, I'd imagine that you in your own sort of life design work, I'd imagine that you see a lot of the limiting beliefs, the behaviors that people have around wealth holding them back.
Yeah. I think personally it both started for me when I started my own business, because you have a direct correlation with, you go, oh, when the shackles are taken off, when I'm not working for someone else, then I'll just be free to do what I want, make money, serve the market, and, it'll just be plain sailing from there. But the difficulties of actually running a business. I think I ran into my own challenges with money beliefs when I struggled to convert a sale or do marketing or figure out my prices or, retain money once it had been earned, where's it gone, all these different things. And then in working with people that were looking to grow their businesses as well, you would find that they said they wanted to grow their business or they wanted to make more money, but at the same time, they had all these types of behaviors that were undermining the very thing they said they wanted. And so, encountered that a lot.
I think perhaps, we could consider it that there could be different points of entry for people in terms of identifying what are the money beliefs holding them back, right? It sounds like for you and for many of us, it's when we finally start to perhaps take action. Maybe we're becoming clearer on our values, or maybe we're starting that first business. And then as we start to step out, I mean, it's very similar to the Tall Poppy episode last week, right? As we start to step out or empower ourselves, then we come up against sort of some inner conflicts, we could call them, or some conflicting agendas. Vice versa, on the other end of the spectrum, it could be that we are yet to fully empower ourselves in business or in wealth building. And again, those same underlying beliefs or fears are actually restricting us from even starting. So I think whether we've started and those beliefs are holding us back, whether we haven't started, or, a lot of my clients, especially my international clients, are often in many regards externally successful. They're empowered financially, but it is also deeply infused with this, I don't feel good enough. I've got to prove myself. There was never enough growing up, or I didn't have these opportunities. And so that can also be an interesting dynamic where externally we might be making the money or we might seem financially empowered, but the way in which we're going about it creates its own emotional challenges, self-sabotage, pressure. And that's when oftentimes I find with clients, it's sort of almost this feast or famine, right? It's 80 hours a week, or then it's, no, this isn't maintainable, and obviously we're going to get into the beliefs that the different ways this can play out for people. Why? I mean, who do you see this as? I think this is such a relatable topic, and you and I have spoke about this for months, doing a deep dive on this. And I think just for the listeners today, we've said we're going to keep it on track. We're going to cover a lot of different ideas. We're going to look at the core beliefs and patterns that you and I have seen in our own individual work. But such a far-reaching dynamic. Is there anything you want to add, Greg, in terms of the value of this topic, what you'd love to get listeners out of today, or even who this relates to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think whether you say, hey, I really want to make more money and I'm clear on why I want to do that, or if you're not, you wouldn't identify as someone who wants to make a whole lot more money, it still impacts pretty much every area of our life. If you say, look, I value freedom, or I value relationships, or I value, personal growth or anything like that, it's often related to money. So the money to be able to have that freedom, the money to be able to have that time, and you don't, in the life design and business design focus that I have, it's often working out what is enough to be able to achieve the end goal that you actually want, because money is a tool, as opposed to it being the end goal. For some people, it does feel like the goal that they want to pursue, but saying, well, what do you want money to be able to do for you once you've worked that out, is then how much do you need? And for a lot of people, it's incredibly important. I mean, if relationally, it's one of the biggest reasons that marriages break down is around finance and the inability to be on the same page, or how it's being spent or lack of it. So you might go, well, I care about relationships, therefore money should be important statistically to be able to be on the same page and have a, to try and eliminate the beliefs that are holding you back on being able to utilize that effectively. So I said it affects everyone, and you might be listening to this from a different place, whether you want to make a lot of money, whether you say, no, I'm not money driven, whether that's values that you actually care about relationships or something else.
And whether that in itself is creating, marriage, stress. And so it's not necessarily that you need to, value the wealth building or financial freedom above all else. Perhaps for some individuals that may be the goal, but for other individuals it might be that their disempowerment or their negative beliefs with finances are then affecting their relationship, their marriage, the other areas that are most important to them.
Yeah, absolutely. So really wide reaching and looking forward to covering that. And I just think for anyone who's listening is being able to work out their own beliefs that might be holding them back from the life that they want and where money plays into that, and then working out what can I do about it, which we're going to be covering.
Absolutely. So let's start with, I think how I'd like to frame up this first sort of segment is what is your money story, right? Or another way of thinking about it could be, your relationship with money started so much earlier than before you started earning, right? And so what we're talking about here, obviously, is our lived experiences. And I think, in fact, not even I think, what I see the most commonly is how our relationship with our parents and their relationship with money is just so influential with the clients I work with. And I think with all of us, right, it really just depends on our level of awareness. What do you see, Greg, or what have you perhaps experienced yourself, if there's anything you could share in terms of what you may have perceived, the moments and perhaps the assigned meaning, we talk a lot about that in the show, that you might have actually observed when you started stepping out or empowering yourself, and perhaps where that traces back to?
Yeah, interesting. I think that the way I'd see it in a broader pattern would be 3 generations. And this happens often with, say, an immigrant family that doesn't have anything, works really hard, becomes, generates some degree of wealth. You then get the next generation that lives within that wealth and can steward it to a certain point. And then sometimes you get a 3rd generation that then goes and loses it, or it doesn't value it, and then it repeats the cycle with people not having. So I say that to say that my dad worked incredibly hard. He came from absolutely nothing. He remembers being the one kid at high school who couldn't go on the school trip that cost sort of $60. Worked really hard as a doctor, earned decent money, bought multiple houses. We grew up, that he really wanted to provide. And so we were then in that generation where we had what we needed and more. So very grateful for that. I think my money story then is like, you can have money and money is fine, but then going on to, but what's the point of it? What's the goal? And I think that life design piece, as we've talked about in the coaching sessions we've done, is also going, well, that can then help me work out why the story for me about money is, it's not the main thing, it's a tool. Whereas for my father, it can be, that's the goal. Money's the goal, because we didn't have any. So we should have some. And so I think my journey with money at the moment is working out the right healthy place that it fits to not be the number one motivating thing, but have its rightful place to not avoid it. Because I thought, well, I don't want to work as hard as Dad did for the money that he had, and he would self-proclaim workaholic. Then going, so I don't want that, but I think my journey can then put a negative association with money, saying if I don't want money, I can be about relationships, but I have to not be about money because that's in some way bad. So that's a bit of my personal thing that I'm navigating with money.
Well, I mean, what a beautiful example, Greg. And the first thing that comes to my mind is it's not necessarily what happens, but how we perceive it, right? And so there's a duality here, which is the seek and avoid. And so it could be that, you associate that your father has, negative financial outcomes, or there is a negative cost to you of him working so hard.
Relationships.
Yeah. In which case you look to avoid that. Or it could be that you associate, more positives with that he provided you certain things and you want to seek that in your own life.
Right.
Neither of which is, morally good or bad, and neither of which is also the full picture, ironically. Both are, Ironically, and I'm assuming a few things here, by the way, it may not be your exact story, but it could be that your father did work very hard. There is natural challenges or drawbacks that come with it, i.e. perhaps less present. But then on the other side, you might have certain experiences, toys, whatever it is that offered you value as well. And so oftentimes we assign a meaning to an experience or experiences, particularly in childhood where the brain is more malleable. And, we take quite a short-sighted view of it. We focus on the pains or the cost to us, or we focus on the pleasures and not the cost to achieving that, right? And so I think, as we get into what these beliefs are and where they come from and how they might, how the listeners can perhaps take from this and how it might be affecting them, I think it's important to both identify what are you running from or what are you looking to avoid, but equally, what are you looking to seek, okay? And both of those are, extremities or polarities that are different to what do you value, okay? So as we spoke about in earlier episodes, when we are taking values-aligned actions, we embrace the challenge in the pursuit of the mission because there's a more sustaining why behind it, right? So obviously, taking action to build wealth or create financial freedom from a values-aligned place is completely different to, avoiding a certain pain that we might have experienced, or, perhaps it could be that we saw our family's business go bankrupt growing up, or we perceived there was a lot of trauma or challenges with not being able to have nice things growing up. And whilst that's understandable, that may have created a disproportionate seeking towards, finances or having that comfort, that safety for yourself in the form of finances. The challenge can be is that if we're coming from either one of these polarities, seek or avoid, we're not going to have the same emotional resilience, the same objectivity, the same long-term thinking as if it's coming from a place of values, okay? And so I've probably sort of redirected back there, but I also wanted to get that across because the goal of the episode today, I think for the listeners, is not only to identify what perhaps their limiting beliefs are around money that might be holding them back in life and their marriage and with their wealth or business, but also what they would love to replace that with. What do they truly value, and how does building wealth or creating financial freedom support that, as opposed to the short-sighted, more primitive attempt just to avoid pain or seek comfort. And I think it can be very hard to distinguish between those two. There's a lot there, a lot more I could speak to, Greg. What does any of that stand out for you, my friend?
Yeah, that's great. I think it's the natural thing, even just looking at what are the beliefs that are holding you back, what are the mistakes that you're making, you go, right, once I identify them, I just need to sort them out. I need to not hold those beliefs anymore, and I need to run to what I really want. And I think what you're talking about with values is often missing, is that people are either unclear about what they value or they haven't then reintegrated the pursuit. I love what you said. We embrace the challenge in the pursuit of the mission, which is having a mission, having a values-aligned focus, and then going, I can embrace hard things. Money can be a part of that, but it's all in pursuit of what I actually value.
Yeah.
So that's really powerful.
And I'll just quickly add to that to make that a bit more, tangible for listeners is obviously, having a mission or a vision for your life of what you would love to do with the wealth or the freedom. It could be help more people. It could be create a product or service that serves more people. It could be give your kids certain opportunities or education. A vision or a mission is significantly different to, I don't want my children to go through the same pain that I went through. And whilst that is understandable, I mean, oftentimes, that is sort of my average client in some regards. They're successful and their relationship, their sort of negative association with money has given them a reason to get out of that hole or avoid that pain. But then again, there's a reason they're seeing me, right? They're a workaholic, or there's this relentless pressure, or no matter how much money they make, they don't feel good enough. Or paradoxically, probably the most common thing I see is it can be that we are so fearful of not having enough that we overcompensate, we're doing these long hours, and then that actually paradoxically conflicts with the actual value that we're all doing it for, which might be the family. And so it could be that we are so fearful of, the kids or the wife not being able to live a fulfilled life, or the finances being the barrier, that we're so overcompensating or overcorrecting, working all these hours, whilst actually, missing the opportunity or not being present to fulfill those values now. And so regardless of where you might sit on the spectrum, whether it's sort of a more negative associated view of money, whether it's a more money will solve all my problems, I think what we're looking at here is how you can create a more sustaining relationship with money, tied to a higher purpose or vision, not just this short-sighted seek or avoid, which ultimately is just a projection of our past experiences.
Yeah, really powerful. Are there any other examples that you have of where our beliefs about money come from, or anything around that you think is important for the listeners before we start moving into some of these beliefs?
Yeah, great. Look, let's make it a bit more tangible. I mean, one example, a client I just recalled, just finished working with. Obviously, I don't share names, etc. Change a few details, but this individual, externally very successful. But what would happen is whenever they would receive their bonus, or whenever they would hit their sort of, next milestone at work, they would basically go out and they would either, gamble that money, or they would, maybe they're putting it in some cryptocurrency, that sort of thing. And so, externally, they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, but they, when they actually received that money, they weren't spending it in a way that was actually supportive of, their values or vision. Now, they did have, to be fair, a real vision for their life of what they wanted to fulfill, both in business or for family, but that fear was taking over. And for this individual, what we identified, which was very powerful, is that they had, this particular individual had, their family was very wealthy growing up for many years. And so the first, I guess you'd say, half of his childhood, they had a lot of resources in abundance. And then there was a particular challenge or a particular era, is how, the individual viewed it, where his father lost all the family wealth. And so they literally went from this sort of, feast to famine. And so this particular individual obviously had a lot of unconscious trauma around this idea of losing money. And so, the programming very much became, whenever I get this money in, I need to spend it. Or money is it comes in and it goes out just quickly. There was that fear of losing it, and so that would result in him making riskier investments, gambling it away, etc. And ironically, when we looked at the gambling and the sort of perhaps what you would label externally as self-sabotage as it relates to the finance, there was two dynamics at play. One was a deep fear of losing that money, but the second one was actually, there was so much pain tied up in his family losing his wealth that whenever he would get a degree of wealth, let's say he gets 50K, he would put that all into a risky investment, being desperate to almost win big and get a couple of 100,000 back to be able to support his family. And so I think that's an interesting example of how there's both the negative polarity of what he's trying to avoid, avoid losing all the money, but also what he's desperate to seek, which is, putting his family back in that position. And whilst both of those are understandable, it was resulting in this very conflicting, very, the money comes in and then I'm basically gambling it away in the hope that will allow me to provide for my family. And so obviously, this individual will be very frustrated because very smart guy, very switched on. One of the things we spoke about earlier, Greg, is that it's not, it's less often about your intelligence or your self-awareness, and more about the underlying emotions or beliefs, obviously, that are governing our behavior. I mean, it was Warren Buffett that said, if you don't, I believe he said, if you can't manage your emotions, don't expect to manage your money, right? And I think, I'm not sure if you may not see this as much as I do, but I do work a lot with investors as well, and it can be equally, they can invest to a certain level, but when they get to a certain point, as we said earlier, when they really start to step out or empower themselves, a lot of those beliefs come to the surface. So I think there's a lot of different ways this can play out to people. Does that make sense in terms of that? Hopefully that wasn't too abstract in that story there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you start to step out, or when you say, no, the real limiting thing is I haven't started my own business, or I haven't made money, and when I do that thing, then it's all going to be fine. And then you go and attempt to do that and something else is getting in your way, I think is really interesting. And obviously these people coming to you going, I thought this would be solved quite simply, but there's something else deeper going on,
yes,
which I think is a great transition into these beliefs, to have a look at them.
Yes, let's go.
Yeah, having a look at what's underneath the surface and bringing that into the conscious awareness of what might be self-sabotaging us or giving us an unhealthy relationship with money.
Absolutely. So in the spirit of that, obviously we did some prep work beforehand, what do each of us see, respectively in terms of some of these beliefs or patterns around money. Do you want to hit us with number one?
Yeah. So the first one is, what if I fail again? You've seen this a bit, Hayden.
Huge.
What if I fail again? So this either, is it a past memory of that, or just even a future projection of, well, if I fail again, they become future limitations. What do you see with this?
Yeah, look, this is probably, I would probably say this would be the most common belief or sort of self-doubt in another sense that I see clients have. The analogy that I give to my clients, because again, a lot of these things, as I said earlier, Greg, can be very slippery, can be very hard to identify. Oftentimes we might sort of become somewhat conscious of a limiting belief around money, and then as we start to step out, we go, well, maybe I should just be grateful. Who am I to do that? Actually, things are pretty good.
Right, it morphs.
Yeah, and we look for ways to justify our current position. And, perhaps as much as there might be some truth and perhaps we could all be a bit more grateful, oftentimes these narratives or these sort of stories we tell ourselves are really just narratives or a cognitive bias to help us, avoid these pains. So, the story or the example that I give is there was a client I was once working with, and first of all, me, we started with the values. Where do they want to be in life? What truly do they value, right? So we have a clear direction or orientation. And this individual really, they valued both finance and wealth building for their family, but they also valued animals. And one of the things that came up is that they'd always wanted to be a vet. And so as we started to identify what that would do for them and how that would be most aligned and fulfilling, they became really inspired. And this individual's homework was to come back to me next week and present, all right, how we're going to get there. Let's break it down into sort of micro action steps. Let's not have it too overwhelming. Let's go value or vision, start reverse engineering backwards from there. And it was interesting, almost comical in a sense. They came back and the next week they led with, you know what, Hayden, look, I love animals and it'd be my dream job, but, actually I've got a lot on, I think I should just be a bit more grateful. I don't want to, stress myself out. And obviously I knew this individual well enough, and I see this all the time, where I just sort of called them on it and I said, look, that's the story. There may be some truth to it. Let's be real, right? As we speak about, with anything meaningful, there is going to be challenges to it, right? And so we've talked about in previous episodes, if there is a meaningful goal, acknowledging what the costs are to get there, right? But that's about being real and objective with yourself, not about dwelling on one side of it, right? In the same way, we don't want to start a business looking at all the positives and the ways it could go right. And we're naive. We don't want to set a goal and then buy into all the fears and all the ways it could go wrong. But this individual was just telling me how actually he should be more grateful, and actually his current job isn't too bad and all these things. And I sort of got him because I literally had quotes that I wrote down from my last session about how unfulfilling his job was, and how he was, drinking to escape that, and how he would be irritable with his family when he would come home unfulfilled from his work. And so I just think that was an interesting example, because I think many individuals in this situation, perhaps, they probably find that they sort of oscillate back and forth a little bit between, I'd love to empower myself in this way, whether it's financially or in my career, versus actually, no, I'm sort of, who am I to do that? Or what if I fail? I think we're talking about here. And I think that, it's important to note that these fears are going to drive a certain self-talk, right? And then, of course, it's very easy to buy into those thoughts. Just because we have a thought doesn't mean that it is true, of course, right? So I think, this idea of what if I fail, that self-doubt and the ways that we come up with narratives to support where we're at would be the most number one thing I see. And I know we've also spoke about in secondary episodes, and I've seen Sarah Robb talk about this as well, this idea of secondary gain, right? Which means, what is the benefits that we're getting of staying where we're at, which is very, very true. I mean, she calls it secondary gain. I call it, what are the benefits? And so we go, all right, well, what are the benefits of staying in a job I hate, or not empowering myself financially? I don't have to risk failing. I don't have to, I might not be smart enough, I don't have to, on and on probably the fears go. And so I think also asking yourself, what is the level of comfort that you get from staying where you are, will also help you become more conscious of that fear. I know we're going to have to move on. We've got a lot here, but initial impressions, please, for fear of failure.
Yeah, I find that fascinating. The idea that like with the client example that you just gave, that they can get excited, get really clear on what they think they want, and that it feels very aligned. And then given a bit of time, that they can say, no, that wasn't really the primary issue. The primary issue is probably gratefulness. That's what we should really work on, Hayden. I see that in my own life, where you set a direction, you set a goal, and as you start moving towards it, something else will say, no, this is the main thing. Yes. And just the fact that can be a story-led smokescreen for us to avoid the work, or avoid doing what we really feel called to do, or that really matters to us. And we can convince ourselves so strongly that that's legitimate, and how that ties us up. I just find that fascinating. And no doubt that runs as a thread through all these beliefs and how we just work as people. and how you, and in a positive way, can hold people's feet to the fire and go, hey, no, I need you to sit with what we talked about last time and realign them with that. So two things came up for me. One was Stephen Pressfield in his book Turning Pro. He talks about the payoff being incapacity.
Is that the UK guy?
I'm not sure where he's based. It could be UK, but he talks about resistance and the resistance to doing the thing that we actually want to do or that we feel called to do. And that's so much of the stories that we tell ourselves, the payoff that we get is incapacity. So you don't understand, Hayden, I'm so busy. You know, what's the payoff of that story or the benefit is I get to get let off the hook and I get the benefit is incapacity. And if I can convince you that I'm incapacitated, then the tension of not being who I could be and doing what I should do goes away to a degree. And obviously you get long-term regret, but you get short-term comfort. And the other is the idea from Carl Jung that I read recently, which was the idea that neurosis is often a replacement for real suffering. So mental suffering is often a replacement for real suffering. So Hayden, if you knew how busy I was and how much I wrestle with this and how hard this is for me and all the stuff I need to work through, and often we're just, and that's not always the case, but that we mentally suffer. And I identify with this. I journal things and work things out and going, oh, if you only knew how hard I was wrestling with this. Well, have you taken one simple step towards the goal you said you wanted? Well, the payoff of incapacity was I got to not take a single step towards, experience genuine rejection. Genuinely, that didn't work. Genuinely, the market didn't want or I couldn't make that money. And so I get to play in my mind, and that's a form of suffering, no doubt. But, have you suffered in the real world? As in, did you go for the job? Did you try and make the sale? You can avoid all that by recreating it in your mind. So
I love that, Greg. One thing I'll just quickly add to that I've been reflecting on recently that I heard another therapist say is they said, actually being aware, what is the emotion that you're trying to avoid there? We often talk about, what is the fear, et cetera, and that's obviously true. But I think, there's also a bit of a metric on identifying, what is that emotion we're trying to avoid? Because if we can recognize that actually all our behaviors are trying to avoid that unbearable feeling, that weight, then, the success metric to a degree almost actually becomes, am I confronting that emotion, right? And, I had one client recently actually, and he's doing fantastic. And it's interesting, his, every session now he's telling me, Hayden, actually, this challenge, this vulnerability, this fear has come up and I'm sitting with it, and he's viewing his success metric as, is he actually confronting those feelings, which I think is huge because, with this particular individual, like all of these analogies we've said, his self-sabotage, his self-doubt, his escapism has all been symptomatic of trying to avoid that feeling. And so with him being so clear on what is that root cause, what is that unbearable feeling, now his metric is almost, all right, that has come up and I'm going to sit with that. I'm going to let that pass. I'm not going to make short-sighted decisions to simply avoid that, which come at the cost of our long-term values and vision, right? So
and imagine particularly people that would identify as saying, I'm smart or I can work through this, can be particularly oblivious to the fact that so many of the decisions are being made from an emotional base that they're actually trying to avoid something, and they rationalize it practically, but actually they're sitting with that. Let's move to the next belief, because I know I've got a few to get through. So that was, what if I fail again, being a core belief or behavior that's unhelpful. The next one being, money is hard to make. Where do you see that play out where people believe that it's difficult, it's hard?
Yeah, look, I'm going to open that one up a little bit more. So we could go, money is hard to make, or perhaps another way of thinking about it could be the cost to making money or building wealth is too great, right? And again, we talk a lot about projections. You've touched on it already today. I think in this instance, again, we sort of circle back a little bit. It could be that we saw our father working hard, for money. And, we see the cost to him working so hard for that. It could be, you see the financial arguments. It could be you see him being stressed, not being present, not being able to show up at the basketball game. And then we go, all right, relative to how hard he had to work and the cost for that, we create this belief of it's just not worth it. It's too hard to make. And I think the important thing to recognize there is, that is a hell of a assumption to make. Right, it's a very black and white way of thinking. There's a lot of projections there about our own lived experiences or the lived experiences of others who obviously don't even have the same values or insights or awareness as us, a different generation obviously as well, and assuming, there's a degree of naivety behind it, assuming that would be our situation as well. And so there's a short-sighted, no, I've seen someone do that before, I don't want to be that person. We're probably going to find that, we'll come back to it obviously, but point 3 being, wealthy people are selfish and greedy. And we've spoke about that before. You mentioned, something you'd heard from Luke Kemmys at Keep the Change about, a lot of those stereotypes, which whilst they may be stereotypes, and I think whilst stereotypes do serve a purpose, it is a form of, okay, there is a pattern there. It doesn't mean that it is the truth, right, or the objective truth. In the same way, one thing I appreciate about your work, Greg, and why you're so great on the show here is, you challenging those narratives, and the business owners that you work with, it's like, hey, do you actually have to work the 70 hours a week, to achieve your goals, and working backwards from that. So look, money being too hard to make, I would want the individuals to be looking at where they have perceived that with themselves or others. If it is themselves, it would also be interesting to look at, I had a particular individual that I was working through, and he worked very hard for many years. His business ended up going bankrupt. And this individual, obviously, when I met them, he said, look, Hayden, I've done that before. The cost benefit just wasn't worth it. And I think, in that same programming and with the same motives that he was going from, if we were to take nothing from that and be acting from those same patterns, then perhaps we could say that's true. But what I was able to help this individual look at is the way in which he was showing up, with those earlier businesses were actually so far out of his values and more about actually proving himself to others, who he thought he needed to be. The business becomes successful. I think you literally brought a Ferrari with the first, 100K you made, something like that. And it's interesting because when I spoke to this person, he said, look, I didn't actually even value cars or nice things, right? It was just that was who I thought I needed to be. And so when we actually look at, how did the business go bankrupt, it was, these impulsive or spending, just these unwise decisions that weren't actually based on his own values or own vision. They were based on who he thought he needed to be. And so I think there's a huge amount of wisdom there that we have, that this individual had the opportunity to sort of redefine, to go, well, the story doesn't have to be that you failed. Perhaps the wiser story, or acting from wisdom, not wounds, is that perceived failure was really about you acting in a way of who you thought you needed to be for others, purchasing those things, setting up the business in that way for others or in the ideal of others, not actually from your own values. And so I think, again, when we talk about money is hard to make, it will be wise to look at where is that coming from, and actually have those decisions being aligned with our values.
And do you see this play out as well with money being hard to make, if we take it as a bit of a struggle story, that either, it's not worth the cost. I've paid this cost before. I've seen someone pay it. I'm not willing to make money. So there's the absence of money in someone's life because they don't want to pay that price. But equally, it can be money is hard to make, so it must be hard while I'm making money. Because I've come across this quite a bit where people make it harder than it needs to be because they believe it should be hard. So for the example would be coaches or consultants that are agonizing over things and be like, if I'm making X amount of money, I should be working these hours or struggling to this degree. And if you say, hey, you could make the same money, and what if it felt easier? What if it felt values aligned? What if it was only this number of hours? And they almost go, I'm not allowed to work that number of hours because it must be hard.
So what is this, a pyramid scheme?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Give it all and don't work at all. No, but the idea that some people do have, a good amount of money, they're actually able to make the money, but the way they make it is welded to grinding, being hard. Do you see that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably the most common way I see this, which isn't particularly a money example, but I think we'll get the listeners reflecting is, it's the same with in our relationships or in our marriage, partnerships, is it could be that, we never saw our parents repair in a healthy way with conflict, or, we saw that, when our parents would argue, that, the father wouldn't talk to the mother for a couple of days until they just forget about it. And so, whether it's in a relationship dynamic or whether it's, money and working hard, I think it's very wise to recognize that a lot of these beliefs that we have are obviously based on the perceived pain points that we have assigned meaning to, but they're also based on what we've seen. If we haven't seen someone work 4 days a week and love what they do and get paid well, it's often easier just to default to the pains that we have seen as opposed to what a more values aligned life could look like. And so I think obviously, you turn on the TV, you see You see the Elon Musks who, doesn't sleep and works 100 hours a week, probably more. And you go, God, I wouldn't want to do that. Or then you see the people who, they risk it all and they go bankrupt. But often, we don't spend that same level of detail looking into actually what a more sustaining version could look like. But of course, premise of the show, right? Life by design, not default. So I think, understanding where perhaps we've got these stories in our head from, and just because we haven't seen it before doesn't mean that actually it's not doable. I mean, if anything, if you looked at anyone who's building wealth, they're finding an opportunity in the marketplace and they're solving a problem. And so I think, whether we, want to be a billionaire or whether we just want to have, a couple of million, for the children and set ourselves up, recognizing actually just what we've seen in others does not have to be our story.
Absolutely. I think that next one you touched on for a little bit, but if we move into that one, because I think it's a really common one, the belief that wealthy people are selfish and greedy, this kind of attributing a moral position to people that have money. Where do you see that playing out?
Yeah, look, I'll let you speak to this one for a little bit, but I'll just lead with one thing and then I'll throw it back to you, which is, I really teach my clients that, and I touched on it just before, Greg, that, you get paid in life relative to the problems that you solve. It's not always that simple. I'm probably laughing a little bit at Jamie.
I would say that the perceived value of the problem that you solve, because say like a teacher might go, hey, well, I should be getting paid a lot more because the problems I solve are significant.
Yes.
So I would add the perceived value of the problems in the market, which is often what people rally against as well, is saying, well, I disagree how money is distributed.
Yeah, and look, that's not to say that people that don't get paid well aren't doing a great job or serving people, but I think again, it's challenging your own beliefs. The goal of this episode, right? That if your focus was more, how can I serve vast amounts of people? How can I change the world? How can I have if you don't believe in, the iPhone and and you think that's a horrible design, great. If you have a truly better product that you believe can serve humanity, well, I think that in most instances, you will get paid proportionate to that. And so I think, at times, and this might be a confronting idea, oftentimes those that struggle with money are so internally focused, right? And again, it's very easy to get caught up in trauma and short-sightedness and just survival. But I know I've heard Tony Robbins talk about, often those who struggle with money they're sort of in the selfish sort of mindset in some ways, which is quite a confronting idea. And I'm not saying it's always that black and white, but certainly when we come back to how can we solve greater problems for people and do such a great job at that, I think if that value exchange is there and there's fair exchange between the solution that you're offering and the benefit they're getting, there's a real opportunity there to not only be fulfilled, but also, also get paid well for what you do. And so I think, look, a lot of my clients are business people, they're aspirational, et cetera. It's interesting because I can understand that idea of wealthy people as selfish and greedy. I would probably say that, perhaps I saw that more growing up, but with the sort of individuals that I often work with, especially in the States, I would actually say that the people that I work with that have the most wealth are really trying to serve humanity the most, which it's not to say that's always the case, but going back to what you said before about what you got from the Keep the Change show, it just challenging that belief of, are your assumptions as true as you think they are? Because they're informing your beliefs. So whether you think they're true or not, is that belief serving you?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think where I've seen this play out is for a couple of years I was working with coaches and consultants and helping them productize their expertise. So before I was doing a LinkedIn agency and then also the Life by Design focus was helping them productize their expertise and to serve more people. And because a coach or consultant is often the hub of the business, they are the business, and so they are selling their knowledge, their expertise, and helping people, they are also directly the biggest stumbling block to their own progress because they're not trying to build a business that runs without them. They are trying to be the business and to help people, which is great in one instance. But they would often come up with a self-imposed dichotomy that I have to choose between making money or being of service. And the implication was that they're saying is that service is good and there's an altruistic, I'm a good person. If I make money, I am a bad person, I'm a greedy person. And they would say that this is what they don't want to be. And where that showed up for them was they would go round and round about their pricing. They wouldn't want to charge too much, or they wouldn't market themselves. They wouldn't put themselves out there because they didn't want to be self-centered, and they didn't want to put the spotlight on themselves. Or they, when it came to making sales, and I did this when I first started in business, everything around the problem they have and how you might solve it, and it is all great until you get to the part about working together and how much it will be, and then everyone gets weird and they say, just send me a proposal and I'll think about it, and the whole thing falls over.
Yeah.
And it was often an interesting conversation, similar to what you said, where I helped them to realize often that putting them at opposite sides and putting them in conflict with each other was actually the root cause, was actually how they had seen each of those, whether they were good or bad. But it often came down to their own selfishness. And that was really helpful when I said, well, what if there's people that are struggling, that need your product or service, that need to know about you, and you deciding to not market and put yourself out there means that they are struggling, they are drowning in their situation. Wouldn't you say that's selfish, and it would be selfless to put yourself out there? So marketing becomes a form of service, which then collapses that view. And then you getting paid well means you can help more people because you're looking after yourself, you're in a better state, you're not living from a place of scarcity. You can be of more service to more people. Getting paid well is an act of service for you and an act of service to them, provided that it's not extortionate. And then that becomes an act of service. So that was helpful to try and help people see, okay, how can it all be service, not it's bad and good? And then that is often the thing that's holding them back.
And I'll add one other thing to that, Greg. I love what you're saying there. I think this is a beautiful opportunity to add this in, which is, one question that I get my clients to ask themselves and actually journal out for those who are looking to charge more or empower themselves in this way is actually, what are the benefits to your customers, to your clients of putting your prices up? Which can be a very what the hell are the benefits to the clients? And obviously, first of all, if that is your initial reaction, that's a very wise question to ask, because your initial reaction will determine why, you will sort of reveal why you're charging what you charge. If you go, well, there is no benefits to them, then first of all, you're viewing that you would be taking more than you're giving, which obviously, even if you were to put your prices up, is going to create an inner conflict, which would be a problem. But if I just give the example in my own life, and these are questions that I've asked myself to get to where I am, the benefits of me putting my prices up is, if someone's going to work with me, they're going to take their time, they're going to be serious about making the changes, right? Maybe they can't afford it straight away, and so they have to save up. And during that process of saving up to work with me, they've got to be really clear of what they want to work on. They're mindful that time is money. They're not showing up, playing the victim, talking about the weekends. They're saying, Hayden, I'm serious about achieving this goal. And even with my fulfillment, I'm working with people that are invested, that have clear goals. And so I'm invested in them because we're aligned in that value exchange there. And so I show up, I'm engaged with them, they're seeing the best version of me, I'm committed to them, and vice versa. Versus if I wasn't charging what I was worth, I could burn out, or I could get frustrated that people are wasting my time, etc. But one thing that I see again and again is, when you put your prices up, you will attract a different sort of clientele. And your ability to serve that clientele more purposefully is very interesting, right? And so I'm not sure if that brings up anything for you, but that's always a question I love to ask clients, because they go, what do you mean? I might lose customers. But perhaps you'll lose the wrong customers and actually gain clients who do really value your service. Or perhaps you might say, well, hold on, I couldn't charge that. I've got to get myself to a point where my skills are at that level. But does that now also not offer you more insight about what, where you need to start, or what taking more values aligned actions would look like? But look, from experience, every time that I've put my prices up, I've attracted more and more clients. I've got better results. And when people engage with me, they're really ready and serious to change their life. And so I would say that I'm doing more impactful work by charging a higher price, which is could be a very un-PC thing to say without finding your own version of that and asking yourself those questions.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think it's a great example, and the fact that that's played out for you. I've had the same thing with the LinkedIn agency. I literally 10x the price. And that wasn't just a figurative thing. It was starting off going, well, if I did this and did that, and maybe it would be helpful for these coaches and these people, and then going and say it's $500 a month, is then shifting to $5,000 a month, but then asking the value of the problem being solved for who would, who would pay that? And you go, well, they have bigger problems, they've got bigger financial upside. So basically trying that out in the market, but also going, the difference is not necessarily the quality of the service. It's the size and the caliber of the problem that's been solved for your intended audience. And so I imagine the people that work with you would say, hey, at those prices, if I make a change in my life, the ripple effect is massive. It's worth it to me. For someone who's making 60 grand a year and, wrestling with, should I do this or should I do that? They might say, look, it's too much for me. I think that the one part I'll say on that is, if someone has a problem with that idea, is you can say, anyone that can't afford my services, I want to help them as much as I can for free, like you're doing, creating YouTube videos, creating podcasts, providing free materials. If you can't, same as Alex Hormozy, if you're not at a certain amount of million revenue per year, here's all the free materials. Get there. And if you're at this stage and you then want to work with me, let's work together. So that's one thing with me putting up prices, as well as going for how can I then make it easier for people who can't afford it to still get change and also serve the people who can afford it.
Well, I love that you take that on, Greg, because I think that if someone, let's say, had a value on helping others or service to others is very important to them, and they said that a big part of that is the quantity of people they want to serve versus the quality and the high level problems they want to solve. I mean, I wasn't going to say it, but I mean, I've got, so not only is, we've got the show, which is, the goal is free value to people. It's not, I'm pretty busy. I don't necessarily need more clients. If I get a client, great. But the goal of the show is to really help people make changes in their life. There's no cost to that. And then equally, I've got other therapists that I have done some mentoring with that I really recommend, who charge considerably less than me. And so if someone was serious and that finance was truly a barrier, I can just refer them on to Kelsey, who I often recommend people go and see. And so I think, like we said, if you start to go, actually, what would be the benefits to your clients and your life, your family, your values of putting your prices up, then you then start to reveal, all right, well, what would it take to get there? Do you need to increase your skills? Do you need to also develop a referral system if service is important, et cetera?
That's great.
But again, we come back to living purposefully or by design. Let's power through these last couple, my friend. Where are we at?
Yeah. So this next one is, I don't deserve more, or people like me don't get rich. The self-worth and identity conflict that can come with that.
Yeah. So I think, the one thing I'll add to that, again, we could be here for hours, Greg, but would be, what do we value, and making our product and service around that. I think oftentimes when we have these narratives of, I don't deserve this, we're holding ourselves to these unconscious judgments we've put on ourselves. I came from X family, or, I, didn't go to university, or, the first thing I tried, I failed. And again, oftentimes if we explore those memories, what we'll find is there was a lot of incongruencies about the even reasons why we were taking those actions to start with, right? And so, we've spoke a lot, I know you've touched on this, Greg, a lot in other episodes, about how our behaviors will always be proportionate to our identity, or what we think is our identity. And so I know you and I talked about this out of the show, that from my perception, our true identity is a synthesis of our values and what is most meaningful to us. But oftentimes, in fact, I would say almost always, we don't know who we are because we don't truly know what we value. And if we don't truly know what we value, we're comparing ourselves, we're putting ideals on ourselves, and we're taking these actions that are more so from the avoidance of pain or seeking comfort or fitting in. We spoke about tall poppy last week. And then in that context, we're comparing ourselves, we're minimizing ourselves, we're feeling like an imposter. Because to a degree we are in some regards, we're not coming from, a place of true authenticity. If I was to, perhaps, what would be an example, perhaps I could say, all right, who am I to charge, double the price of a psychologist? But I'm not interested in clinical diagnosis, traditional talk therapy. I'm interested in, how do we actually make the practical changes? And so that almost kind of ties back into the other point of, if you solve those problems, there will always be a market for that. But if I was to be comparing myself to, a psychologist and putting my work in that frame, then perhaps I would be saying, who am I to charge this? Who am I to make this show? I don't deserve that. I haven't got X qualification or whatever it is I'm comparing myself to. But if we come back to the values and where we do have that sincerity, that integrity, we'll find that we're able to actually break through that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really powerful. Just in the interest of getting through these for the listeners as well, I think that's valuable. I think we might have covered this one enough already, which is that success comes at a cost. And so what will I lose if I succeed? Just a small part on this, I think that particularly where we maybe have a core fear of, being excommunicated or being excluded from the tribe, this feeling of I will lose relationship if I, make money, or people's relationship with me will change. That can be a big one for people. What do you see with this? And I know we've kind of covered success being at a cost.
Yeah, look, I'll just recap this one briefly because I think we actually covered this quite well earlier, I believe, which is just, those projections that we put onto ourselves. I mean, essentially we see the price that other people pay oftentimes, or we see the price that we may have paid at the start, but we're not actually looking at the details of it. Again, what is their values? Do those values differ to ours? What was the almost their internal operating system from their beliefs? If your father had a belief that you just need to work hard, but also had a belief that, who is he to charge X amount of dollars, then his outcomes in life will be proportionate to those beliefs. And so I think often what we see is just a snapshot. We're not really seeing the operating system or the internal dialogue that has got ourselves or got people to that point. And so I think, as I said earlier, I think there is a cost, or there are drawbacks to achieving anything meaningful. And, if otherwise, why would we have kids, right? And talk about something that has a cost, or has challenges associated with it. But as I said earlier, when something's meaningful, we embrace the challenges in pursuit of the mission. And so I think not assuming that the costs or the pressure, the expectations that others had is going to be what we need to have. But at the same time, being real and going, all right, you want to build $1 million business, or you want to have children. Let's be real, right? There may be challenges. There may be less one-on-one time. It's often harder to have a conversation with my fiance, when we've got 3 young kids around. And so those are real costs, but those are authentic costs relative to what I've chosen to build, not projected costs of someone else's life that I'm just projecting or internalizing into my own life.
Yeah, that's really powerful. A small example of that is we just did a caravan road trip, and people are going, was it horrible? I mean, we said, no, we thought of the cost before we went. We really imagined how hard.
Great example.
We imagined how hard it was going to be. We imagined the worst day, raining, I have to be on a call, kids are doing homeschooling, everyone's feeling trapped. And we imagine how we're going to cope with that. And so when we literally encountered that day, I turned to my wife and said, this is that day. We saw this day was coming, and we handled it. And so I love that around like pre-thinking about the cost, and that there often is a cost. I mean, even relation, I know that example again with Alex or Mosey, but them going, hey, in different times and seasons, the relationships have changed, and that's a cost that we were willing to embrace because it's living out of a place of values. Let's move to the next one, which is I'll be happy when. This kind of pushing out. And how do I experience gratitude?
So I love this one, and it's interesting. I put this one deliberately at the end because I thought it's a bit more contrarian, or it's quite different to the other ones. Because oftentimes, I mean, perhaps someone could recognize off the bat the pitfalls to having that belief. This is never ending. I'll be happy when, and perhaps we can all relate to that on some level. But the reason that I'm putting that in the sort of the money beliefs that keep you stuck or affect your life is, earlier, Greg, I spoke about it's not only what we're looking to avoid, but also what we think we need to sort of cling on to or seek, and assuming that will solve all our problems, which is not the case, frankly. As we said, everything shares that duality principle. Oftentimes a lot of the clients that I work with, who may be wealthy, they talk to me about how, they have trouble dating because they don't know if the women are only with them for their money, or their friends get intimidated by them. There's tall poppy. So even if we, oftentimes we think I'll be happy when I have this money, I build this wealth, I get that promotion, but then we're living in fantasy land. And what I mean by the fantasy is we are perceiving that if we achieve a certain outcome, there's only going to be positives, no negatives. Right? I mean, that's like me, Rick, I wanted to get to where I am, and then, being unaware of the responsibilities or the pressure that might come with working with the people that I work with, or, the calendar management, or et cetera. And so I think the I'll be happy when was one of the most interesting things for me, because oftentimes, again, we put so much into, when I just get to that target, things will be okay. And obviously, first of all, that comes at the cost of being present in what we do value now and actually enjoying the journey. And the second thing is that is not the full picture. Okay, perhaps building wealth or achieving financial freedom supports our values, and that's meaningful. but that'll come with its own next series of challenges, right? And so I think looking at what we are so desperate to seek, yes, we've talked about how that will come from our past pains and experiences, but recognizing that sort of that fallacy of, I'll be happy when. I know actually, I think our first episode, Greg, was actually what I sort of called the happiness trap or happiness delusion, where it's kind of like, when everything lines up, I can be happy. And the problem with that is we're setting ourselves up for this emotional roller coaster, or we get there and then it comes with a new set of challenges, just like, anything does. Many people are trying to have kids for months or years or IVF, and it's when I get there, things will be great. And perhaps you get there and it's meaningful and rewarding, but maybe, you have young kids, you wouldn't say it's great. You'd say it's worth it, but it's challenging,
sure,
right? Like anything. And so I think the I'll be happy when, I thought was a bit of a sneaky one to put on there, because it doesn't sound like a negative belief. But I think in many cases it makes our relationship with our goals and our finances, for many people, it makes it unsustainable because there's this relentless pressure. I've got to get there. And then that drives the self-sabotage, the burnout, the escapism, the not being present. And so that comes with its own costs as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And just with your example there of, someone who might want to have kids and maybe they're struggling with that. I literally know someone, in that space at the moment. It's been a number of years. And you can say, well, it might not actually be, it might come with challenges as well. And the other part that I think of is you are currently, and you could totally want that, and that's legitimate, and it's a big deal. At the same time, you're pitting your happiness or your internal freedom or your internal disposition based on that thing happening. And so the other part that I think about is what happens if it doesn't happen? What happens if you actually aren't able to? Is your happiness then derailed for the rest of your life? And is that is that what you're setting things up for? Not that it wouldn't be challenging. One of the questions I like to ask around when someone's shooting for a goal, say it's a money goal, is trying to identify the emotion that they have associated with what they think they will feel when they're able to solve the problem that they think they're trying to solve with money. So you go, I just want to make 200 grand a year, 300 grand a year, whatever it is. And what do you think you'll be able to do? Oh, then I'd be able to do this. That really matters. And how do you think you would feel if you had that? Oh, then I would feel relaxed. Then I would feel significant.
Such a good frame.
Then I would feel like I was living an adventure.
Yeah, then I'd finally feel good enough could be another.
Yeah, and so you go, oh, what is that emotion? And then if you can help them realize you're actually pursuing, and a lot of times it's practical, but there's an emotion. There's a way they want to feel that they are withholding themselves from feeling now, or that they don't currently feel. You ask, is it possible that you'd be able to experience that emotion in the next 7 days or even today without having that money or without hitting that goal? And they can realize, oh, actually there are little moments or ways to approach life that thing that I'm saying is 1, 2, 5, 10 years away can actually be experienced on a day-to-day basis in the absence of achieving the goal. And you can achieve the goal as well, but so often we set up this incongruency that I cannot feel that way. Yeah. I'm sure, from the values lens, that's very similar. But
absolutely. And I just had one thing to that, Greg, before we sort of round off with the takeaways and potentially breakthrough moments, is that, I would suggest if you look at what is that elated state, that they're striving for, that they're sort of, putting everything on hold for in the present, thinking when they get to there'll be that relief, you'll find that elated state, again, there's sort of there's the emotional piece, but the fantasy, that elated state or that emotion that they're thinking that is at the end of it will be proportionate to the pain or emotion they were trying to avoid. And so I think that could just be another interesting cue for people to think about as well. Because, I think moving into maybe the final sort of synthesis of all this, is a lot here, is, the purpose of today obviously was to become more conscious of where does your relationship with money coming from? Do any of these beliefs relate to you? And if so, where? And starting to go, where did I pick that up? And does that need to be the case? And then I think lastly, like I said, defining how would building wealth or creating financial freedom serve your values and your mission, which is such a different perspective to actually, how it would help you avoid pain or seek pleasure. Reflections on your end, Greg, and then we're going to end with a couple of questions that listeners can perhaps ponder on post today.
I think the main one takeaway for me is just that values aligned, rather than being pushed by pain or, pulled by a perceived pleasure that you think will be a good thing is what is your values aligned mission that you're willing to suffer for, work for, but it's coming from, or not even suffer, the challenges you're willing to encounter. So both for me and maybe it's a takeaway for the listeners is spending time doing that so that it's the core tenet of this show, right? Is being able to become aware and then realign those so that they are values led with what matters most to you. But just taking the time to sit down and actually do that. So to map it out, to write it out, to talk it out, just to a place that it lands. And I just put down here, sit down and count the cost of what you're about to build.
Yeah, great.
Which is just, okay, if that is the vision, here's all the things that could happen. And then making peace with those so they're not a surprise and you try and avoid them.
I love that. And I know we spoke about that before, but it's such a powerful exercise because if you count the cost and you perceive it's not worth it, well, great. Isn't that huge? To let go of that unrealistic expectation, the pressure that you would be putting on yourself, let alone all the self-sabotage or imposter syndrome, et cetera, that would come up because it's not from a values-aligned place. Huge. My notes very much what you've said, awareness creates choice. Right. So, obviously this isn't a, in-depth therapy session to work through it, but simply becoming aware of if any of those beliefs relate to you and how they might be playing out allows you to have that awareness. I believe we spoke about, sitting with those uncomfortable feelings and perhaps viewing that as a bit of a success metric in itself rather than the fantasy. And then some reflection questions that I wrote up for the listeners today is, again, this is just a synthesis of what we've said earlier, but, what experiences or perceptions, right? Because it's not the experience inherently, it's the perception that we gave, the meaning we made out of it. What experiences or perceptions shaped my relationship with money? It's question one. Question two is, what beliefs did I form as a result? Okay. And then we want to look at how are those beliefs influencing my financial decisions today? And then lastly, are those beliefs helping me create the financial future I want? Okay. I think in some regards, they might find, well, in a very short-sighted way, I'm getting ahead or whatever that short-sighted metric is. But oftentimes, if you look longer term, perhaps it's your family, perhaps it's the travel and experiences you might value, perhaps it's the kids, perhaps it's simply that what you're building in the business is getting to a point where it is unsustainable because you're not loving the process and you're not embracing those challenges in the pursuit of the mission that we've said a couple of times. Well, if it's not sustainable, it isn't going to be a viable, wealth building strategy in the long term, right? So a huge topic today, Greg, and I think this is probably something, whether it's someone calling in with a question on, could be impulsive spending. If anyone has one, I'd love to go into that or anything else. I'm sure that there's a lot more we could, that we will touch on with this in the future because this was a topic that we've both been wanting to get to for a while. But thank you, Greg, and thank you for listening. If you got value out of this episode, please leave us a comment below. Liking, sharing, subscribing really helps the show grow. And if you have a topic you'd love us to speak to or a question that perhaps we could go into that others could benefit from, please reach out or you can apply to have your question answered on the show on breakthroughpod.com. Until next time.